We're so lucky to have best-selling author and motivational speaker joining us today, Simon Sinek. Simon, I know how busy your schedule is. We asked for 20 minutes. You said make it 30. I can't thank you enough for making this conference a priority. It's so important.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yep. And I love the hat that you're wearing. I mean, talk about knowing your brand, knowing your audience. So thank you for putting that on. The AFWERX, the group responsible for this 3-day virtual conference I mentioned to you, they were honored by Fast Company yesterday as the number 16 most innovative places in the world to work. By the way, Amazon came in number 18. It's the first time ever a government unit has made that list. It's truly historic. But this should come as no surprise to you. You've said publicly before, the Air Force isn't just the most innovative branch, it's quite possibly the most innovative business in the world. I love that. I hear some cheering down the hallway. I know they love that too. Why do you feel this way? Do you mind spending a few minutes telling our audience what makes for that great culture of innovation?
The Air Force is a culture of ideas. It's what it is. Everything about the Air Force and the way it operates is all about idea generation. If you think about it, a kid with a couple stripes on their arm can say to a full-blood colonel, "Hey, ma'am, I've got an idea," and that colonel will say, "Let's hear it." You can't do that in the Army. Like, that doesn't go over well. It's an organization that's comfortable with asking questions. I mean, it's a joke. It's a joke in the Air Force, right? The only constant in the Air Force is change. Everybody knows it. It's a punchline. It's an organization that's comfortable with experimentation, and innovation requires experimentation. And I love that. If the commandant of the Marine Corps said, "I want all my Marines on parade ground on Sunday in white gloves," every Marine would be there. Every base, every town where there's a Marine base would be sold out of white gloves, and they'll all be waiting, being told what to do. If the chief of staff of the Air Force said, "I want all my airmen on parade grounds in white gloves on Sunday," the emails would start flying. Do we have to be in white gloves? Why are we wearing gloves? Do they have to be white? Can they be off-white? It's just a culture of questions, and it's a culture of experimentation, which is just a perfect foundation for innovation.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I've sent those emails myself and received them, so that's really good. And you put out a new book about a year ago in 2019 called Infinite Game. I've read it a couple times. I love it. I've got it on Audible. And I've taken so many notes because I think it really applies to so many people and so many different levels of the organization, whether it's business, the military, and quite frankly, any sort of community effort. As we talk about base of the future, so many bases that are out there when you talk about spiritual, mental, emotional, physical. So high level, just what are the concepts behind it, the differences between maybe some of those businesses who play that finite game versus the infinite game?
So Dr. James Carse, a philosopher in the mid-1980s, articulated these two types of games, finite games and infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed upon objective. Football, baseball, even conventional warfare. There's always a beginning, middle, and an end. And if there's a winner, there has to be a loser. And then you have infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players, which means new players can join at any time. The rules are changeable, which means you can play however you want. And the objective is to perpetuate the game, to stay in the game as long as possible. We are players in infinite games every day of our lives, whether we know it or not. There's no such thing as winning education. No one's declared the winner of careers. And there's definitely no such thing as winning business. There's definitely no such thing as winning global politics. It doesn't exist. The players come and go. The problem is, if you listen to so many of our leaders, they talk about being number one, being the best, or beating our competition. Based on what? Based on what agreed upon objectives, based upon what agreed upon rules, based upon what agreed upon metrics, based upon what agreed upon timeframes. And the problem is when we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, there's a few very consistent and predictable outcomes: the decline of trust, the decline of cooperation, and the decline of innovation. And so the organization that is the United States Air Force, like the United States, is playing in an infinite game. The goal is not to win or lose or beat the other branches, for example. It's to stay in the game as long as possible, to be relevant and viable, like any business. And likewise, I think what is a new concept for a lot of people to consider is that warfare can exist in both forms as well. We're mostly familiar with finite warfare. There's an agreed upon objective, whether it's a land grab or decimating an enemy or something like that. And at the end, there's usually a treaty, right? There's a handshake and we say, okay, we're going to stop fighting now. There's a beginning, middle, and an end. One team is declared the winner and the other team accepts that they are the loser, right? But then there's infinite warfare. The Cold War is an infinite war. We don't want a winner or a loser in that scenario. It's catastrophic. And so both teams play to stay in the game. And so in an infinite game, because there's no winning and losing, the objective is to frustrate the enemy of will and resources. And just to give one analogy, it's what happened to the United States in Vietnam. We won most of the major battles, if not all of them. If you look at the Tet Offensive, for example, the surprise attack against over 125 targets, we repelled every single attack, every single one. If you look at the Vietnam War as a whole, we lost 58,000 troops. The North Vietnamese lost 3 million people. So if you go by the metrics, we won. Then how come we lost? It's not that we lost. It's that we were playing against an enemy in an infinite scenario. They weren't playing to win or lose. They were playing to survive. And so I think one of the great opportunities for the military is to reconfigure itself, to know what kind of warfare it's in, and then to adjust its strategy and even the manner in which it uses its platforms so that it's playing for the right game that it's actually in.
See, and I love that connection. I wanted to talk about, I think, a worthy rival. I think you would define China as a worthy rival.
Yeah.
When we go back a few years ago, General Mattis, Secretary of Defense, where he said that, look, we tried pivoting to Asia back in 2010. We left one foot in the Middle East. Now we've made a significant change in our national defense strategy, where he said that, our biggest threat but our biggest advantage is our entrepreneurial ecosystem. And the fact that we are not tapping into it is how China is going to be they'll compete against us better in the future. That's quite frankly why we have the AFWERX challenges, is to be able to help accelerate some of these great innovative technologies at the front lines. You've written about companies that are playing the infinite game right now and those that don't do it so well. But from a geopolitical perspective, how are we doing in this infinite game against China? Because it seems like they're playing the infinite game quite well, and some would say that we're playing the finite game.
I mean, I will use a technical term. We're doing shit. We're crap at it. Let's be honest. The United States, I would say, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, has become a consummate finite player. Shorter and shorter timeframes, falsely believing we can win and lose. Heck, when the Berlin Wall came down, when the Soviet Union was dismantled, we announced to the world that we had won the Cold War. No, we didn't. There's no winning global politics. The other player dropped out of the game because they ran out of the will and the resources to play. That's what happened. And unfortunately, we acted like a victor and imposed our will on the world. We had good intentions, but turns out that lasted for about 11 years, and then other nations started to push back. If we consider that the Cold War existed on 3 tensions, there was a nuclear tension, there was an ideological tension. We're both ideological exporters. We're exporting democracy and capitalism, looking for customers. The Soviet Union was exporting Soviet-style communism, looking for customers. So there was a nuclear tension, an ideological tension, and an economic tension. The 2 largest economies in the world were the United States and the Soviet Union. Not coincidentally, corresponding precisely with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The only 3 things for which we will bear any burden and pay any price. They are, for the United States, existential. And it was convenient that our primary competitor in that game, all of those 3 tensions existed in a single pole in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union dropped out of the game, not because we won. They dropped out of the game because they ran out of the will and the resources to stay in the game. They ran out of money. Turns out the Cold War was super expensive. They fell out of the game. New players emerge, as is the definition of infinite games. And so the nuclear tension has been replaced by North Korea, maybe Iran, maybe Pakistan, The ideological tension, Soviet-style communism, has been replaced by religious extremism. And the economic tension has been replaced by China. We don't really fear nuclear war with China, but my goodness, do we screw with each other's economies all the time. And so the Cold War is alive and well. It's Cold War 2.0, which is a big problem when our modern military has almost every facet of our military, from strategy to the way in which we conduct warfare, has largely, if not completely, been formed, because we were isolationists prior to World War II, by the Cold War. And so now the world is different. We're in Cold War 2.0, and the question is how are we going to adapt for the game that we're in? Unfortunately, we are unaware that we're in the Cold War because we don't perceive a single rival. There are these multiple rivals. And so we still falsely believe that we're fighting to be number one based on I don't know what metrics, to be the best based on I don't know what metrics. And the reality is, because others are doing a really good job, they have 500-year and 1,000-year plans. We have, 2, 4, and 6 year plans, if we're really lucky, even annually. And I think we're way, way, way behind. There's a lot of hubris that existed because we were the last country standing for now. For now.
Right.
And that's the thing in the infinite game. You
Yeah,
might be the winner for now.
I'm sorry. Andrew Marshall, OpsNet assessment. So his strategy is what helped drain the Soviet Union, get us out of the Cold War. Some would argue that China is sort of taking that same blueprint and potentially trying to do that to us. When you take a look at, maybe a stated goal by them being a hegemon by 2040, 2050, you look at their economy, their GDP, the number of people they have, and it's all shifting to Asia. So is that the sort of strategy that they are looking at too when you're talking infinite game?
You can look at all of the rivals that we've competed against in recent history and how they played against us. Look at Al-Qaeda, look at Osama bin Laden, right? Clearly, Al-Qaeda can't defeat the United States. It can't happen, right? Militarily, just like the Viet Cong couldn't defeat the United States militarily, couldn't do it. And so the question is how do you attack our will and how do you attack our resources? Because of what every expert knows is a relatively minor threat of terrorism with a very potentially low loss of life. But it's the fear that they instilled in us. This is what terrorism does. And if you think about the amount of money that the United States has spent to combat that threat, not to mention the fact that they've even created a groundswell of racism in our nation. And so they've affected our will and they've affected our resources. So who won? Who won in that scenario? Great damage has been done to the United States, the fabric of our nation, and the money that we have. China's doing the same thing. They're very, very skilled at getting us to react and spend a lot of money and to unnerve us. Will and resources are the things you drain in an infinite game. And most of our competitors in this second Cold War, this Cold War 2.0, are better at it than we are.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's been written out there that would certainly agree with you on that. And I think others are saying that we continue to play this finite game. Look at Hong Kong, South China Sea, intellectual property rights, Taiwan. So you've got those real issues that we have to contend with while also thinking about the long term. How do you balance that? And is this where the innovative entrepreneurial spirit of America can come into play? Because we may not be able to compete person for person or dollar for dollar, but we have to think through maybe asymmetric ways that we can do so for the next 20 years.
Yes. I mean, the simple answer is yes. Remember, the infinite game is not the absence of finite games. It's the context within which finite games exist. We have to stop thinking of it as conventional war. We also have to stop using sports analogies because those are all finite. We have to start thinking of it much more like lifestyle. It's like going to the gym. You want to be healthy. Well, you can still have a finite goal. I want to lose X amount of weight by X date. Great, go. And metrics are really important because it helps us, stay motivated, but it helps us measure progress towards some sort of ideal. I want to be in shape, right? That was an arbitrary goal on an arbitrary date. And if you hit your goal, you're super excited, everything's great, but here's the problem. You have to keep exercising for the rest of your life. The game doesn't end. Or let's say you miss your goal and you don't lose the amount of weight by your chosen date. You know what happens? Nothing happens. In fact, you're healthier now than when you started. And if you just stay on the regime, you're 100% going to hit your goal maybe in the next month or two. And this is why character and values of an organization and of a nation state matter so much, because it's about process. It's about sticking to what we believe in. It's about sticking to the game plan. And even though we have goals and we have time frames, and they are largely arbitrary, and they help us measure things, they're not absolute. Now, sometimes there are absolute things contained within that infinite game. There are battles and wars that happen within the infinite game. There are things that have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the objectives are crystal clear that we know that when that objective is accomplished, the fight ends. But that's not always the case, and sometimes we're very bad at articulating those things. Afghanistan didn't have to drag on as much as it did if we had a clearly articulated finite objective where we announce upon this objective, we're leaving. Iraq is the same. But because we didn't, we found ourselves in the same kind of quagmire, in the same kind of infinite scenario that drains our will and resources like it did in the Vietnam War.
Yeah, we do. And I think a lot of people would say the next 3 to 5 years and decisions we make, that's what's going to shape the next 20. It's so
Yeah.
important to get these next couple
Yeah,
of years.
and I think that the military has an amazing opportunity to reinvent itself. You know, let's be honest, we've been so dominant in so many areas for so long. It's been 20 or 30 years before we faced a peer competitor, and I mean, you get lazy, you get complacent. The push and the drive to innovate and innovate and innovate. A lot of the innovative forums with Deep Blue, Checkmate, all of these things that used to exist kind of went by the wayside because they were seen as less as a need or too expensive. And I think now we're feeling a little bit humbled, if I'm honest. And I think now's an opportunity to get going and really sort of make up the lost space.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we brought so many entrepreneurs and small businesses to the table with our showcase here at AFWERX Fusion to be able to get some of the best innovative ideas are in those small businesses. And so if I could transition to people, because without our people, it doesn't matter about the machines, the technology, none of that's going to matter. So we've been attacking so many issues the last couple of days. There's been so much to talk about with mental health and the spiritual base. You speak on leadership, you know it very well. You've studied the military for decades, but you also write about trust. We talk about vulnerabilities, the importance of identifying your team's just cause, and things have changed a little bit, or maybe the rules of the road have changed a little bit over the last 4 to 6 months. When you look at places that people congregate, churches, public spaces, sports, classrooms, these are areas that people draw upon to help strengthen their spiritual base. Have the leadership methods and the congregation of the next couple of months, next couple of years, have those changed? Or do the same concepts apply? We just have to be a little more innovative in how we continue to foster those trusting partnerships and relationships.
So I think there's a few things at play here. When COVID happened and many of us were forced to work from home, there's a few things that happened. One of the things that happened is the military, which has been trying to do this for years, who said we could never do it, all of a sudden found itself able to do it in a month, right?
Right.
Like nothing like a burning platform, right? In other words, we have capacity. But I think when people started to discover that we're able to function virtually, maybe we don't need our offices anymore. They're taking for granted, that the relationships pre-existed, that the trust pre-existed. That's number one. Number two, we're also starting to realize that being at home by ourselves or with our families the whole time, like, I actually would like to leave the house, and you can't really have a great brainstorming session over Zoom. It just doesn't work. There's something about being in person. And I think one of the things that people fail to recognize is that running a virtual organization is actually way more difficult than running an in-person organization. And the reason is because trust doesn't happen in a Zoom room. Trust doesn't happen in a meeting. Trust happens between the meetings. Isaac Stern, the virtuoso violinist, said, he said, music is what happens between the notes. And trust is the same. Trust happens between the meetings. It's when you're filing into the conference room and you're like, hey, Steve, hey, Bob, it's like, hey, I heard your dad was sick. Oh, yeah, he's doing much better. Thanks for asking. It's when you leave and you walk down the hall to your offices and you keep talking and decisions are being made. It's having lunch together. It's bumping to each other in the hallway or at the copy machine. It's all of the in-between things that build trust. It's like a relationship. Like, our spouses didn't fall in love with us because when we were on the date or when we remembered their birthday or Valentine's Day, it happened in between. It's how we conduct ourselves and how we treat each other, when I go to the fridge and I get a drink for myself, I bring you one as well without you asking. It's these little things that happen between the big events. And so I think that going back to the office, it's that fabric that holds us together. Nothing replaces human contact, nothing. We can mitigate it for a while, we can drag it out for a while, but at the end of the day, human contact and human interaction is where it's at.
Doesn't matter if I do a bunch of Zoom calls, if I do emails, phone calls, FaceTime, it's irreplaceable, correct?
I've heard a few examples of people who met a potential significant other on Zoom. They're doing the whole COVID dating thing. They're on FaceTime every night. They're falling for each other. I heard a story just recently, another story, where somebody was living on the East Coast, fell in love with a woman on the West Coast. They've been talking for a couple months. He thinks she's the one. She thinks he's the one. He says, I'm going to come visit you, gets on the plane, flies to California, and in a day is like, yeah, no, this is not for me. And she's like the same. There's something about human interaction and the chemistry of human beings that, as much as we like to believe, cannot be replaced. Take a Zoom room as a perfect example, even in a meeting. I mean, so for example, first of all, we spend a lot of our time looking at ourselves rather than the other person, or we're staring at a dot in the middle of our computer to give the appearance to the other people that we're looking at you, but really I'm just staring at a dot on my screen. Or if I really want to make eye contact with you, and I do look at your eyes, you see this as I'm looking at you in the face trying to make eye contact. In other words, it's fake. It's fake. It doesn't really work. I actually think phone works better, to be honest, to have difficult conversations rather than Zoom.
Yeah, and it's interesting to bring up that point where you try to keep your personal family life separate from your work life. Your family's at home saying like, we don't want you working at home, and you're coming in saying like, well, I don't want you playing at home. But now you've got this sort of integration, this overlay of family and work, and you're trying to maintain that balance. So do you see this sort of model? And I don't know if this is going to last for 6 months, a year, 2 years, who knows? But do you see this model happening over time where more of your work persona in life actually integrates with your family life?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. We have this twisted notion of work. We're always talking about work-life balance, as if they're two completely separate things. I mean, the reason your friends love you is the same reason your colleagues love you. It's you. And if you're different in one of those two places, then in one of those two places, you're lying. I think there's something to be said for showing humanity. I'm a great believer in the huddle. The Monday morning huddle where we come together and don't talk about work. We say, what's on your heart and mind? How was your weekend? And we learn about who people are. And I think there's something magical about you being on a Zoom call and your little daughter runs in and sits on your lap, or your dog's barking in the background. I think it adds a level of humanity and vulnerability to someone that we are actually very, very good at hiding and masking and pretending doesn't exist. I think it's a nice thing to have a blend. I think to keep them so separate is untrue. Human life is messy, and we all have a messy life.
It is, and we've heard several times over these last couple of days, Simon, that our families we try to shield them from some of the pains, from some of the stresses at work, specifically as it relates to COVID, but even just across the spectrum from a military standpoint, and even from business owners, you feel like you're the shield, that you could take it all upon yourself. But what we continue to hear is that families want to be a part of the day-to-day life. Families want to hear what you're going through. And the more that you can share those experiences with them, the tighter of a bond that you're going to have.
It's a team. Your family is a team, just like work is a team. And if you're struggling at home, your work family will help you out. And if you're struggling at work, your home family will help you out. Your home team will help you out. So I think there's a lot of good that's actually come out of this.
So I agree. And I think a lot of people are feeling that way. Everyone's experience has been a little bit different. But as we talk about leadership and supervising and accountability of people that are around you, you write about ethical fating and trust in the Infinite Game. I think it applies from both the leader to the employee perspective and from the employee to the leader perspective. So what does that mean right now? If leaders can't be in the rooms making sure that their subordinates or even their colleagues are doing what they're supposed to be doing, because like integrity is you're doing what you're supposed to be doing even when no one is watching. So how should bosses, how should leaders, and even just how should work colleagues be thinking about that?
Well, I think asked and answered. I think highly functional organizations that are values-based, people will do the right thing when no one's watching. The fact, when you say your boss looking over you, I think you have a weak organization if we need your boss to tell you that what you're doing is unethical. Everybody makes ethical lapses, but ethical fading affects organizations. So I think one of the things I found so interesting about these COVID times is it's really, crisis is a great revealer of good and bad things. And I think a lot of good old fashioned leadership has sort of been revealed. So for example, whether someone was an effective or ineffective leader prior to COVID happening, what we saw just organically happening is a lot of people in leadership positions, when COVID hit, picked up the phone and checked in on their folks. They picked up the phone and said, "Are you okay? How are you doing? Just want to make sure you're okay." Well, why did it take a crisis, a global pandemic, for you to do that? That's called good leadership. Why aren't you doing that all the time? And for organizations that have been well led, you'll find that when left to their own devices, the people will continue to conduct themselves in very highly ethical ways. Organizations that put excessive amounts of pressure on people to hit arbitrary numbers by arbitrary dates, to the point where they find themselves hoarding information instead of sharing information because of I have to get ahead, I have to win, I have to get my bonus at the end of the year. Again, you can hear the finite mindedness in this, where I might stab someone in the back or take credit because literally my pay depends on it, or my promotability depends on it. Organizations that did that prior to COVID, well, they're going to suffer during COVID as well. So I think strong values-based organizations, whether we're together or not together, I think we take care of each other, rely on each other, and as individuals and as a group, act more ethically.
So those who were flourishing before COVID will flourish even more. Those who weren't will not.
It's the great revealer.
Great revealer, right? Final question. We got less than.
And crisis was an opportunity to shift and to learn lessons. But if all things being equal, then it would have exaggerated whatever was going on before. Yes.
I know we got less than a minute left. Servant leadership. What does that mean to you? And like I said, we've got thousands of leaders at all different parts of the organization tuning in right now. And as we're going through this tough time, coming out of it, we're piecing this all together with the base of the future, tying it back to innovation, health and wellness of our airmen and their families, servant leadership. What does that mean?
I find it ironic that we have to call something servant leadership. All leadership is servant leadership. You have servant leadership and you have bad leadership. That's what you have. Servant leadership to me is serving those who serve others. It's committing yourself to the responsibility to see those around us rise. It's not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in our charge. That's what leadership is. It is a responsibility to take care of human beings. There's not a single senior leader or person in leadership position who's responsible for the results. Zero. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the results. Generals don't win wars. We're responsible for the people who are responsible for the people who are responsible for the people who are responsible for the outcome. And effective leaders take care of those beneath them and set upon them the responsibility to take care of those in their charge. And that's called effective hierarchy. A Marine Corps friend of mine, Lieutenant General George Flynn, he's a retired 3-star. He said he can always tell if a young lieutenant is a good leader. He says because their Marines will start to take possession of their lieutenant. They'll say, "That's our lieutenant." If they say that's the lieutenant, there's a leadership problem. There's good leadership when they say that's our lieutenant. It's always the colonel. It's never our colonel. It's always the colonel because the relationship is distant. But you can tell when it becomes a personal relationship, when it becomes our lieutenant, there's something good happening over there. In other words, it's human.
That's great. And Simon, what a great way to end this on our people, culminating this fantastic 3-day virtual conference with you. It's just an incredible honor to have you here. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us, and be well, and we'll see you again soon.
An honor, and I hope I get to work with you again soon. All the best, everyone.
Likewise. Take care.